Good
Hi,
to see you.
I'm
Hey,
Andrew.
how are you? Okay, tonight we have a fascinating discussion. We're going to be talking mainly about um, the origins of everything in Judaism. So it's a really important topic, I believe, and I think that once you have an understanding of this, you can understand so much more about how Judaism works. Let me give you an example. What I will do is I'm going to share my screen, and I apologize if certain issues come up. This type of PowerPoint is a bit different. Okay, so my question for us today is, if you were to look at the origins of the festival of Yom Kippur. Now, on Yom Kippur, we fast, we have a custom that we don't wear leather shoes, and we stay in shul most of the day praying. Where does this concept come from? How do we know about this idea? Where's the idea of this on Yom Kippur? In the Torah, it doesn't clearly say that we cannot eat on Yom Kippur. So if you would look in the Torah, it says on the 10th of the seventh month, Lo ta'anu et nafsho techem. You should afflict your souls. Now, the word ta'anu, inui, can mean several different things. It's like, sometimes somebody tells you, like your kids can come up and tell you, like, Dad, I want this. And you're like, that could mean 5 different things. What do you really want? So the question is, how do we know that the word inui, which means affliction, in this case means to fast? We have numerous cases where it means something else in the Torah. Sometimes it means to abuse. Sometimes it means to cause suffering. So why do we think that it means to cause to fast? And the answer is what we're going to discuss in today's. Okay. So this is something that we're going to discuss as we go along today, and it will become clear to you. And I think it will give you a really interesting outlook in how Judaism works. That's why I called it Decoding Judaism, because sometimes Judaism's been around for hundreds of years, and we do all these things and all these different laws. We don't know where they come from. How did they get developed? How did they evolve to where they are today? Right? So if anytime during today's class, and most of the time we're going to be using a PowerPoint just to make things easier to understand. If for any reason you've got to ask a question, raise your hand or unmute yourself. Okay, so don't feel bad to. I might say, well, let me finish the point, but I need you to be able to understand if something's not clear. Okay, so we started with a question about Yom Kippur, and this is going to take us to our next point. What's going on? Sorry, my computer's playing. So if we look at sorry, one moment. Okay. If we look at some of the most famous and important, what we consider important Jewish practices, you will always be able to see an issue with them, which is, where did they come from? Because often some of the most common Jewish practices, you can't actually find them in the Torah. For example, the Pesach Seder. Parts of the Pesach Seder are pretty much clearly specified in the Torah, like eating the matzah. It says clearly in the Torah to eat the matzah. To have a Paschal lamb or eat the maror, that's in the Torah. To tell the story of the Exodus, that's in the Torah. But to drink 4 cups of wine, to have the Seder, to all those other things are not clearly specified. So my question is, where they come from? Hanukkah candles. Now my kids ask me questions like, Tal, why do we have to do this? And I say, well, the Torah says so. But the truth is, I'm not lying, but it's also not 100% the truth, because you would struggle at times to actually see that in the Torah sometimes. Hanukkah candles. Where do we have the concept of Hanukkah? Is that written in the Torah? No, that came after the time of the Torah. Fasting on Yom Kippur, as I mentioned, it says in the Torah, it hints in the Torah, but it doesn't say it clearly. And finally, bar and bat mitzvah, which is considered by all Jews, no matter where you come from, to be particularly important. But it actually is not specifically mentioned in the Torah. So there's thousands of more examples that I can give, but you see that many times these concepts are from something known as the Oral Torah. So the question is, what is the Oral Torah? And where did they come from? So who made them up? Were they just made up by humans? Did people make them up? Or did they come from some higher source? And if it was made by God, why is it not written in the Torah? That's our questions for today. When we understand this concept, it will give us a really great insight into how Judaism works. So let me start off with a story. Our story takes us back to the time of the Second Temple. In the time of the Second Temple, there was a man famously known as Shammai. And Shammai has one really famous story that we know about him, where a man comes to him and says, I want to convert me while I stand on one foot. And Shammai takes the measuring stick in his building and he says, that's not possible, leave. Now, there's lots of Kabbalistic reasons what he did, what he was trying to teach them. But the man went to Hillel, and Hillel said, don't do unto others what you don't like done to yourself, and the rest is commentary. Great, beautiful story. Now, there's a very similar story, but a totally different message. Another convert comes, another non-Jewish person comes to Shammai and says, teach me the whole Torah, but I only want to know the written Torah, because I don't trust you to teach me that. I don't believe in the oral Torah. So Shammai said, mate, there's no such thing as a Torah without a written Torah. So I can't do that. That doesn't exist. Either you want the Torah, the written Torah, the oral Torah, or you don't have any of it. Okay, so he left. And he went then to Hillel. And Hillel says to him, you want to know the whole Torah except for the oral Torah? Sure, no problem. Let's start with the alphabet. Okay, so he starts teaching him the alphabet. Now, let me just, for example, stop for a moment and go back to my screen and explain to you how he did this. Now, there's a concept in Torah. There's 4 parts to the oral Torah. So when we talk about what's known, the Hebrew term for this is Torah Shebal Peh. What is the oral Torah? The truth is that it's not one answer. It's not a very simple answer, because the truth is that the oral Torah, the Torah Shebal Peh, has 4 categories to it. It's divided into 4 categories. And once you understand these 4 categories, you have a really easy way of deciphering where that particular law comes from. Now, tonight we're going to focus only on category number 1, which is the most basic concept of the oral Torah. And let me explain to you what it's called. It's called Kabbalah. Now, there's 2 words that we use for Kabbalah. Kabbalah could mean mysticism. They have the same meaning. The Kabbalah means received. But Kabbalah in the mystic word, like the Zohar, that means that it was received from Moses and Mount Sinai. That means that it was received, through tradition, souls, and people learned about the deepest secrets of the world. That's known as the Kabbalah, basically. But then there's another element of Kabbalah, which is Jewish laws that were received, but they weren't written down. Let me explain to you what that means. That means that they are the basic explanations given to every single commandment and every line of the Torah. So if you were to open your Chumash, let's say you had a Chumash open to you right now, and you were to take the Chumash and you would start to read the words that were in the Chumash, and you would say this, you'd read the word, the line exactly as it is. And I would ask, and you hadn't taught anything, you hadn't gone to Hebrew schools, you hadn't gone to Jewish schools, you hadn't learned any Torah. And I asked any of you that is here tonight to explain to me what that particular line means. I can assure you that almost every line in the Torah, you would find a different meaning to it. Because there's so many different ways of how you can explain it. We'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so tonight we're focusing on the most basic concept, which is simply, there's a line in the Torah. It says, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. What does that mean? So we translate as, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, the Lord is one. Did you know that the Christians say that that means that there's a Trinity? How do they use it? It clearly says that there's one God. But because it says Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem, they said, well, we could translate it into a different way. And this concept became a major debate or discussion in the discrepancies between Judaism and Christianity. Till this day, if people try to do comparative religions, which we're not very fond of that idea, but when you want to debate, they'll say, well, your whole Judaism is based on an oral tradition, which is true, but they don't realize that theirs is also. So let me explain to you what we mean. Just before I get into that, let me show you something. We have another 3 categories to the Oral Torah, which is derived and hinted to and traditions, but we won't get into them tonight because we have to first understand the first category. Okay? So let's get back to, for a moment, to this whole concept of what it is. It's a written explanation. So the first question is like this. What is wrong with the written Torah that it actually requires an explanation? Why can't we just have the Torah as it's written? So in the background, you could see over here, there's a picture of the Torah as it's written. What's wrong with that? And why does it need an explanation to go with it? I've already explained to you the answer, but we're going to see this in more detail, how it's actually impossible to have the Torah without anything. And this is an important point. I was a rabbi in Sydney for a short while, about a year, and I remember one of the big discussions that I had with two Israeli fellows, and they said what they don't understand is why Torah Shebaal Peh? How do we know that it's true? And why would God need it? If God wanted to tell us something, why would he not have put it into the Torah? God could put whatever he wants to in the Torah. Why would he leave things vague or ambiguous? Certainly he would have put it in the Torah. So I want to pause for a moment and just ask, what do you think is a possible answer or explanation to that question? Does anybody have an idea of what we can possibly answer that question? Anybody want to attempt?
Excuse me. Maybe he wanted us to think about it, to try and work it out for ourselves a bit.
We wanted us to try to work things out ourselves.
A bit.
Okay, very good. Excellent. So that's not tonight's discussion, but we will see that there is the later parts of the Oral Torah are things which is known as derived. So parts of the Torah are things which are going to be derived, and that's part of the Oral Torah, but we had to come to that ourselves. And there's a really important reason why that had to happen.
I've got a question.
Yes.
Sorry.
No problem.
It's always bothered me. How we can be sure it's oral? It means not, well, it's not written. It is go from person to person, but how could we sure that's meaning is always be there, or that's a play in the words, or something been slightly moved? I wouldn't use words twisted for the Torah, but slightly misinterpreted or mispronounced, and suddenly it gets a different meaning.
Okay, very good question. That's an excellent question. So Sam, if you're able to stay towards the end tonight, I'm hoping that I'll be answered that question.
Of course I will.
Okay, good. So that question, I will clearly answer that question tonight. So the answer in short is that there was a process that they used to protect the Torah from being distorted. Okay, but we're going to see what that process is, and I want you to tell me if you think that it suffices and it was enough. But first, I want to first talk about the first question was, why do we need it? Why did we have to have, why didn't God just put everything in the Bible? And how do we know that there was actually a need for Oral Torah? So I must be honest, I'm doing this shiur, and it requires a whole bunch of texts from actual written text, and I'm not able to show you all the text on the screen. So I'll be quoting text, but not showing them. Or some of them is just on the top of my head. Just give me 1 second. I wanted to see if I have one book over here that I can show you. 1 second. Okay. So there's, whoops. Sorry. Okay. So the first text that I started off was a text from the Talmud. And I wanted to tell you the rest of the story, what happened with Hillel. How did Hillel actually answer the convert about studying the Torah without the Oral Torah, and how that's even possible? Sorry, one moment. I lost this for a second. Could you see my screen? Were you able to see my screen? No.
Not yet.
We can see you. We can see you.
Okay, now you can see my screen? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so let me show you what he did. First of all, we have to understand that the reason why we need the Oral Torah is for every single idea to understand it. We need an Oral Torah, because without it, we would be totally lost. So this is what it says. It says, Hillel sat down with the non-Jewish man, and he said, okay, let me teach you. First thing, if you want to be able to learn the Torah, you need to know how to read the Jewish alphabet. So let me teach you the alphabet. So he said, on day one, he said, okay, you see letter 1, that's an aleph, letter 2, that's a bet, vet, gimel, dalet, hey, vav, zayin. And he showed him each letter how to pronounce it. So the Talmud says, the first day Hillel taught him aleph, bet, gimel, dalet. The next day, what did he do? He reversed it. So he did this. He said, today, aleph, that is not an aleph, that's a taf. The next one he called it sin, then shin, then gimel, then reish. The dalet he called the kuf. He changed around the names of all the letters. So the convert says to him, I don't understand. Yesterday you told me that that letter was an aleph and the other one was a bet. And today you're telling me that that's a taf and that's a shin. So this is the brilliance of Hillel. So he said, you see, you were relying on me and you believed me about the aleph. How did you believe me that an aleph is an aleph? Obviously, I have an oral tradition. I have a tradition that's been passed down from generation to generation that tells me that that letter is an aleph, the next letter is a bet, the next letter is a vet. You know, wherever Jews have been found, we all had slightly different pronunciations, but we all had the same names for the letters, because we had a tradition from generation to generation. So Moroccan Jews still called an aleph and a bet, a vet, a vet. They didn't change the names. They didn't have totally different names. They still had the same names if they were still studying the Torah. And they were, most of the Moroccan and the Taimani and the Iraqi and all the European communities. The world was divided. They didn't see each other for thousands of years. Yet they were all still calling the things the same. Why? Because they had traditions passed down from generation to generation. So even, for example, English, it has to be transferred from generation. Every text has an element of oral tradition to it, even the language like English. Because I'll give you an example. If you've heard of the Rosetta Stone, the Rosetta Stone, for example, for those that aren't so clear on it, it was a stone that was found some 1700 in the 1700s by I think it was one of Napoleon's soldiers or somebody like that. And basically, the Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Egyptian letters, and the way they write, people discovered it, Europeans discovered it, but they had an issue. Nobody was able to decipher what the letters meant, what those signs meant. And for hundreds of years, people looked at Egyptian writing, and there was absolutely no way of deciphering what it meant until they found the Rosetta Stone. And on the Rosetta Stone, they found that there was both hieroglyphics and there was also Greek, and I think there may have been Latin or some other known language. And what that helped them was it allowed them to, over time, several years, through studying the correlation, they saw that it was actually the same document. The stone had the same words, but written in different languages. And through that, they deciphered, and they were able to crack the code and figure out what Egyptian hieroglyphic words mean, or the signs mean. Okay, but what does that tell you? That the only reason they're able to do it is because they found another text that they did read. But if they would have had Egyptian people continuously using that text from generation to generation, they would have been able to decipher it. But they didn't. And that's why it had to be updated. And that's why they had that issue. So that's the first thing. In order to even simply understand the letters, you actually require a tradition. So it's incredible how you hear from Christians, for example, they would say, well, Judaism believes in the old tradition and we don't. The funny thing is that Christianity came about, and they won't even deny this, 1,300 years after the start of Judaism. So there's no way that these Christians would have been able to understand the Torah. And as a matter of fact, most of them don't even have their understanding of the original text. But even those that did and that translated it, they're basing themselves on our translations or in our ways of how our tradition taught how it had to be interpreted. So first thing, even to just understand and be able to know what the letters mean, we had to have a tradition, and that tradition had to be passed down from generation to generation for the last 3,033 years. And that has been going on. Yes, Noah?
Well, in that case, why did we need to write? The oral tradition could have been put down in book form in the Midbar already. When we got the Torah, they could have put down another book with explanations, as like instead of oral tradition, instead of oral Torah.
Okay, very good.
It could have been written alongside of it.
Okay, excellent. So I'm hoping we're going to have time to discuss all your questions. So in short, your question is, why do we even need an oral Torah in the first place? Why didn't Hashem just put the oral Torah in the beginning? Correct? Is that your question?
Yeah, more or less, yes.
Okay, so let me know if I answer that question. But I just want to first go through just the necessity of the oral Torah and where it actually is required. Okay. So the next thing is that even just to be able to understand the word. So the Torah is written without vowels. So look on the board for a second. I like this. I didn't create the PowerPoints, but I love this one. Look at these three letters in the English letter, and I want you to try to just adding vowels, how many words you can think of. Just adding vowels. It's a little bit of a exercise to exercise around. Say a word that you think of. You could unmute yourself. Bread.
Bird, bread, beard.
Beard. Board.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at these just by adding vowels. There's a whole bunch of words, and this is only some of them. So you see that if you were to look at a Torah, the Torah has no vowels. And that's why a Torah needs to be read by somebody that has practiced and knows how to learn it. But how does that tradition, how do we know whether a person is reading it correctly? Because almost every word in the Torah can be read in numerous different ways, right? Because it doesn't have vowels, just like the word bird. So sometimes you could say the context shows us, and that's true. And the more you learn context, in modern Ivrit, they also don't have vowels, but they make sure that the context shows what the word is. And when it could be confusing, but often in the Torah, you could have, even though the context could give you the answer, but sometimes it doesn't. So what would they do? This is the way it is. the top is the way it is in the Torah without vowels, and that's all that was written. Moshe only wrote the way it was on the top without the vowels. The way we have it in the Chumash, we have it with the vowels. And that's why when somebody reads the Torah, there's somebody on the side that's correcting them just in case they make a mistake on the vowels. Because if they make a mistake on the vowels, they'll be saying breed instead of bird, or abroad instead of board. So it makes a significant difference. It changes all the meaning of the words. So that's really important. So how do we know which is the correct way of teaching? Simply, the answer is because we had a tradition. This was never written down originally. It was an oral tradition passed down from generation to generation, exactly how it has to be written and what vowels are placed there. So here's a great example. The word chalev, it says, do not cook a kid in its mother's chalev. Now the word chalev, chet lamed bet, can either those same things. If you call it bechalev, it could mean bechalev could mean milk, or bechalev means fat. So it doesn't mean in the fat of its mother. So therefore you could explain it either way. If we didn't have a tradition telling us what the vowels were, then you would be able to explain it another way. Okay, so this is the second reason of where you see the necessity, the basic necessity to require vowels to understand an oral tradition in order just to simply understand how to read the letters. Okay, that's teaching us how to, the possibilities of how we could have done. Now, last idea I wanted to show you is one more thing. The Torah has no punctuation. So I want you to just quickly read this and tell me if you find this statement okay. Irene, what do you think about this statement? Woman without her man is nothing. Do you think that's a nice statement, the correct statement? What is your opinion?
Well, in our day and age, it goes against woman's lib.
It's woman's lib?
Sorry.
Okay.
But the commas, a woman without a man is nothing.
Right. Okay, so let's look for a second. If you were to change things around a bit and put the commas in different places, you would say woman without her, man is nothing. So it just depending on where the commas are placed, you could have a very different sentence. And now there's no punctuation and commas in the Torah. And if you're not careful when you read the Torah and you put the combination in the punctuation in the wrong place, then you could actually get different meanings. And that's why we have something known as trop. You know that tune that we use when you read the Torah, that is actually part of that. Not all of that, but part of that is actually the punctuation.
Wow.
Okay, so that helps us to, if you look in the Torah scroll, there's no vowels and there's no punctuation. And in a scroll, you will have both vowel. In what we have to have, the tradition tells us that there's both the vowels and the punctuation. So if you look in a Chumash, you will see all these funny things that you don't actually learn when you learn how to read Hebrew. You only learn that if you're becoming a Torah reader, like the blue marks. I don't know if you could see my mouse. Can you see my mouse on the screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So those blue marks, that's the punctuation. So this would be read as Vayomer Elokim. I'm saying Elokim because it's God's name. Yikavu Hamayim. That's the tune, but that also adds into the meaning. And where did that come from? Once again, that is a tradition all the way back to Moses on Mount Sinai, how to read that. All places, no matter where they are, have the same trop. No place has different trop. So that's the third basic concept, that we simply would not be able to even read the words without the vowels. So here's a example in the Torah of how this is from actually last week's portion. When we read about the menorah, it talks about depending on where you would put it, it would give us a different understanding. The knobs and the flowers, the knobs and the goblets, and it just based on where you put the vowels, it has a very different meaning to that particular one. Okay, but now this is the main point I wanted to get to. today. That was just showing you that even to basically understand, be able to read the text with the right punctuation, you require an oral tradition, a tradition passed down, because the Torah, it basically leaves you with very little in and of itself. So let's go down to the next step. The most important element of what the oral tradition, first step of the oral tradition was, is the concept of the biblical message. In other words, the meaning of the words. If you look at any line in the Torah, as I mentioned to you before, the word, this is the Shema. So this is the way a mezuzah would look. Look at these words. It says, these words that I command you this day shall be upon your heart. Give me 1 second. So the question is like this. How is these words supposed to be upon our heart? And it says, what does that mean? Or if you look at the Shema, which shows it's over here, it has the most famous line in all of Torah, the Shema. It says, these words that I command you to this day, to you this day shall be upon your heart. And then it says, you shall bind them for a sign upon your hands. What is it talking about? What does that mean? Can anybody tell me what that means? Just look at the words and tell me what that means. And they shall be for a totafot between your eyes. What does this mean? This is just literal translation. You shall inscribe them upon your doorposts of your house and upon your gates. What? Inscribe what? And where on your doorposts? Where are you supposed to put them exactly? All these laws, what does it all mean? So here you took the most famous line or paragraph in all of Torah, was considered the most primary thing, and you look at it, if you were to take it just in simple literal translation, how would you understand it? And the truth is, if I were to give these words to everybody, you would find different explanation. As I mentioned to you earlier, the Christians took the first line, which he doesn't even put here, to mean Shema Yisrael, the top line, to say, it says Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, 3 times it says God's name. So therefore it's talking about some type of Trinity. But the very next word says Echad, it's only one God. And you could just make up whatever you want. Every single person would have a different meaning to it. So let me just backstep a moment. There was historically, not all Jewish groups have actually believed in the Oral Torah. Most famously, there was two famous groups that never believed in the Oral Torah. The one was known as the Tzedukim, or in English we call them the Sadducees, and the second group was known as the Karaites. The Sadducees lived particularly at the time of the Second Temple, and they didn't believe in the Oral Torah, so therefore they took everything, they try to make things as literal as possible. So for example, it says in the Torah, Lo savir eish, what's the words? B'yom HaShabbat. It says you're not allowed to make a fire on Shabbat. So therefore, they made sure to eat cold food on Shabbat, and they would sit in the dark on Friday night. Why? Because they said you're not allowed to have fire. And the Torah says no fire. You're not allowed to light fire. So they took it to mean, in the most literal sense, you're not allowed to have any fire light on Shabbat. But what does it really mean? And what is our tradition? Moses told us in Mount Sinai, no, that means, what that really means is you're not allowed to light a fire. But if you had a fire that was lit before Shabbat, then it's okay. So not only is it not, you're not allowed to, but you should light before Shabbat. So the Torah tells us that before Shabbat, the rabbis instituted 2 laws. Number 1, that before Shabbat, we should light Shabbat candles, and it's generally done by the woman of the house. In order to why? To bring peace, because Shabbat is a time of peace and time of rest. And if you have no light, could you imagine sitting at your Friday night meal in pitch black? It's not like these days where you'll have a few, I don't know, a few beeping, a small little light somewhere. And it was pitch black in the old days, unless it was a full moon. It was pitch black. That's the way they would sit. How much fun would that be? Not very fun, right? So the rabbi said, not only are you allowed to light the candles before Shabbat, but you have to light the candles because you won't be able to enjoy Shabbat without that. And then the rabbi said, furthermore, in order to show that you're not a Sadducee, on Shabbat day, you should try to eat something hot, which means that it was lit before Shabbat. Why? Because you want to show that you don't believe, that you believe in the Oral Torah, which tells us you can cook. And what's the famous thing that we eat that's hot on Shabbat? The famous thing that Jews have eaten on Shabbat for many, many generations has been cholent or cholent, right? Joe, if Joe was say he's not Joe, he'll tell us that cholent comes from the word shul end, which is the first person that told me, because at the end of shul, everyone would go to the baker or whatever it was and get their pot. But the Hebrew name for cholent is actually chamim, which means hot food, because the idea was it could be anything that you started to cook before Shabbos. And why cholent tastes so good is because, you know, dinner usually takes it could take a half an hour or an hour or two to cook. Cholent cooks for at least 15 hours, probably more like 24 hours. So it's a pretty cool thing. It cooks and cooks and cooks and cooks. And the longer it cooks, the better it gets, right? So that's one of the great things that we got out of this. The second group that famously didn't believe in the Oral Torah was started in the 7th century. They were known as the Karaites. They also once again caused a lot of issues for mainstream Judaism. And then at the time of the Rambam, they really started dwindling, because the Rambam, Maimonides, he really proved that to have a Torah without the Oral Torah was just impossible. And he showed that their belief system of, oh, well, they just started publicizing, why should we believe in the Oral Torah? Because it's just made up by certain rabbis and some people that are agenda, and they're just seeking for power. When he started showing to them, and he logically proved to them, and a lot of what I'm showing you tonight is based on the Rambam, that it's actually impossible to have a Torah without the Oral Torah, they stopped that, and most people came back to traditional Judaism. So there is a small group of people that still claim to be Karaites, but it's been smaller and smaller. And I think the people that are doing today, we don't even know if they're really Jewish, if they're really connected, or they're just some people that have popped up and claimed that they go back to the Karaites, but there is such an existence of these people. Okay, but it's very, very small and almost non-existent. So getting back to our slideshow, if you look at the words of the Torah, you would see that the most fundamental thing you would require is a way of understanding. As soon as something's written down, you need to know how you can actually understand it. And the Torah tells us that the Torah tells us in Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu says, HaMitzvah, the Torah that I'm commanding you today, lo rechokahi, it's not distant, and it's not wondrous. It's not in the heavens that you should say, who's going to go down to heaven? But I've given it over to you. But when you look at the Torah in itself, you would look at it and say, hold on, how am I supposed to understand it? So therefore, you see, the question is, how do you know that there's Oral Torah? The answer to that is there has to be an Oral Torah. Because if there's no Oral Torah, every single Jew would be practicing something different. And that's why, by the way, when you look at Judaism, no matter where Jews come from, if they're following traditional Judaism, they may not have spoken to each other for thousands of years. They were in Taiman, they were in Morocco. That was like further than the moon in the old days. It could take sometimes hundreds of years to get messages between different parts of the world. But they all kept a tradition and taught each other the traditions. And when we came back, we saw that anybody that we knew that existed from the time of the Second Temple, they still kept the same Torah. The only thing that had changed was the fourth part of the Oral Torah, which is the customs. So differences between Judaism, Sephardim, Ashkenazim, Hasidim, that's not part of this part of the Torah. Those differences are only from the custom part. But when it comes to the basic understanding of the words, every Jew believes in the same tefillin, for example. Every Jew believes in the same mezuzah. There's just certain customs where we differ. Okay? So that's a really important point to understand. And we'll talk about how customs are developed and when they're important or not. Sorry, okay. So is there any proof in the actual Torah that tells us about the Oral Torah? And the answer is there's several, but there's one most prominent. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, in Deuteronomy, he says that you need to you need to only slaughter your cattle and small animals that God will have given you in the manner that I prescribed. And if you look through the whole Torah, you won't find anywhere where Moshe describes how to slaughter animals. It just doesn't exist. So what is Moshe Rabbeinu talking about? Kasher tzivisicha, how he prescribed it. So he's saying, because I've told you orally how to do it. So just to make sure that's all clear, so you understand, when I talk about this oral Torah, let me just explain to you what actually happened. What happened was Moshe went up on Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. When Moshe goes up on Mount Sinai, he says, he stays there for 40 days. And when he's there for 40 days, God says, okay, this is the law, and this is what you're going to write down. These words, write down these words. And then he says, once you've written down these words, I want you to, this is the meaning. And he would tell them, those words that you just wrote down, this is what it means. But don't write down the meaning. So he told Moses, I want you to go and teach the meaning to the Jewish people. So when he comes down from Mount Sinai, we're told that it was 40 days, but to Moshe Rabbeinu it was like 400 years. What has been 400 years? He was able to consume the amount of knowledge that would averagely take an average wise person, 400 years. But because he was on a level, he wasn't eating, he wasn't drinking, he was able to consume a lot of knowledge. And God was able to teach him the entire Torah with all the details. To him, it felt like a long time because he learned so much. And there were certain points that God left for a later time, questions that came up the Torah tells us about, but generally Moshe learned the entire Torah and all the explanations. So the Talmud tells us that what would happen, that when Moshe would come down came down and he would teach the Torah, the way he would do it. Why do you think the Jewish people spent 40 years in the desert? What were they doing for 40 years? Now we have a little joke. Why they spent 40 years in the desert? Because one of the Jews lost their way, or somebody lost a coin and everybody was looking for it for 40 years. Somebody lost something. The Jewish people this was the one time that they were going to be all together. And this is one time that Moshe had the opportunity to teach all of them. So the way he would do it is, the Torah tells us, he would come and he would teach first to Aaron and his sons. Then he would stay there. Aaron and he would listen as Aaron and his sons taught it to the elders. Then Aaron and Moshe would leave. Aaron and his sons would teach it to the rest of the Jewish people, to the elders, and then the elders would teach the Jewish people, and each time somebody was listening. That's the way it was done. Okay, so he came down, he knew all the laws, and he knew what it meant. But what was he teaching them? The meaning, and how it's going to be pronounced, and how it's supposed to be written. Okay, just anybody have any questions before I go on based on what I said? No? Okay, good. So let's get into some of the some of the questions that were asked, which was by Noach and by Sam, particularly. I'm hoping that over the next few minutes I'll be able to answer those two questions. Sorry, if my computer goes to the next slide. Okay, here is just another example that they're giving us to show us of the need for an oral tradition. So Noah's question was, why do we need to have the oral tradition? Why couldn't God just have written down the Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral tradition, and that should have been enough, that should have sufficed? So if you look at this text, the truth is that an oral tradition, sometimes we think that a written text is the perfect way for things to be. What is one of the biggest constitutional debates in all of history is the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. It's the right to bear arms. Okay, if I was giving this class in America, everyone would know exactly what I'm talking about, because we know that America, the reason why there are so many people have arms is because to take them away is a big debate whether you're allowed to do that according to their constitution. So if you look at it, it says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So there's generally two ways of how these the Americans understand it. The question is it the collective right in theory, and states can maintain an armed militia, or it's an individual right theory, citizens can possess firearms. So if you're part of the people that are all believe that it's their constitutional right, then you read it this way: the right of the people to keep and bear arms. But if you read it the other way, then you believe that it's not only the collective right, and states are allowed to, just in case people and other states come to war against them. So you see how one sentence, just because it's written down, sometimes being written down doesn't help you. And that's why a oral tradition becomes really important. Even things like this. Look at this particular. This is an ancient cookbook from, I think, like the 1700s. It's an English cookbook. If you try to read it, Irene, look at the board and look what it says. Could you read it? Oh, yeah, I know you struggle sometimes with the reading on the glasses. So I'll read it. Do you want to give it a go?
I'll give it a go because it's nice and large at the moment. I can see it. Thank you. Take a good quantity of onions and mince them not too small, and seethe in fair water.
Continue. Okay.
You need to take onions, quite a lot of onions, and mince them and cut them up into not too small pieces. Yeah, is that right?
Yeah, okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Then take them up and take a good quantity of stale ale, as 3 gallons, and there take a pint of oil fried, and cast the onions thereto, and let all boil together a good while. Then cast thereto saffron, powdered pepper, sugar, salt, and serve forth all hot as toasts.
Okay, this is just a typical recipe. If you try to make this recipe as it is spelled out, you would probably need a dictionary just to understand half the words that are here.
Absolutely.
So what you're seeing is that just because it's written down, it doesn't mean that language won't change. Language changes over time. So that's why when you look at the oral tradition and you think about books that are written over the oral tradition, you'll see that there always had to be some type of update. The first major work of Oral Torah was the Mishnah. But then several hundred years later, they had certain issues. They couldn't understand certain parts.
Yes.
So they wrote the Talmud, the Gemara.
Yeah.
And then
I'll give you another example. Rabbi, I'll give you another very small example. I was visiting my grandsons today, and you know what the word sick means, S-I-C-K.
Right.
When you're sick, you're not well. Well, now the word sick means good. That's what my grandsons tell me. Oh, that's right. Did you have a good day? Yeah, sick. Good. So and I try to explain to them, if they listen to a Shakespearean play of say 400 or 500 years ago, they would barely understand what the words meant.
100%.
Absolutely. Language
This
changes.
is exactly the point, 100%. That because we think that if we would just have everything written down, then we would solve all the problems. But the truth is that God knows much better that by writing things down, you don't solve the problems and you actually create more problems. That's why we have constitutional debates, what the actual meaning, because when they wrote it, they thought it was clear.
Yes.
But several hundred years later, we have different ways of interpreting things and it's not so clear.
Absolutely.
So we need to change the way we write things to fit the circumstances. So therefore, unless it's taught and explained orally, for that time, you're going to have a very strong issue with all of them.
You use very good, sorry, I jump in. You use very good words for that time, but time is changing.
Language changes constantly. There's a constant stream of gradually language changes over the years.
So Sam, to your point, language changes, but meanings don't really. Understanding concepts still remain the same.
Yes.
So therefore, why did to Noah's question, which was why did the Torah have to be given over orally, is because it avoids ambiguity of a written text. Because today's day and age, when we look at the Torah, the written Torah, we would really struggle to understand it. And for anybody to say that, oh, I can understand it, as soon as you give it over to somebody else, they'll understand it completely different. But if I tell you, and I say, well, this is what my teacher taught me, that this is what it means, and that teacher goes all the way back to Moses, the meaning that won't change. And that's what the purpose of the oral tradition is. That's why God wanted to be orally given over. The second concept of why it was given over orally, and Noah, I'm hoping this is answering your question, but this is a concept that's really important to understand, is that who remembers before mobile phones were out, how many phone numbers you actually recalled? How many phone? I remember I used to ask my mother, like, almost anybody in the community's phone number, and she'll just tell it to me off by heart.
Yeah.
And now she says, I don't know their number. Look it up. It's on my phone, right?
Yep.
Why is that? Because when it's written down, you feel like you don't have to know it. And, like somebody was complaining to me recently, my grandkids know nothing. They think they know nothing, everything they know nothing. Why? With me, I learned so much and I had to keep it in my head. I kept it in my head. But today, my grandkids want to know something. They just quickly Google it and they get the answer.
Absolutely.
Right. So that's the thing. It's a different situation. But when you don't have it written down, it requires that it's memorized. And we're told that in that time, the way they would learn something is when they had an oral meaning to something, they would teach it and they would revise it 100 times. And they said some that really wanted to work hard would revise it 101 times. Why? Because they had to be perfectly certain that the way they were memorizing it was exactly the way they were taught by their teacher.
Yep.
Exact meaning. Okay. And the third reason is because when you're taught by people as opposed to books, you don't just, some people say, I've learned from Rabbi Google, or I've learned from books. Thank God today there's so much out there, and you go to Chabad.org and Aish and lots of other websites. There's just so much that you could learn. But when you have somebody that you can ask your questions to, and somebody that you can actually see how they live, that's a far more meaningful most of the time than just reading books. And if you don't have that living model of how it's supposed to be done, you're missing a major element to what it means to be a Jew and how Jewish life is supposed to be lived. So if the whole Oral Torah wasn't there and it was all written down, besides for the main thing, which we would have major ambiguity and debate, like you see in the Talmud, there's lots of debate even about the Mishnah, because as soon as it's written down, several hundred years later, things changed. And when you try to study Talmud today, you'll really struggle because there's so much ambiguity. But for that time, it was good. but it causes more debate and more issues. The second thing is people start relying on the books and they don't feel like they have to memorize it. They don't feel the pressure of memorizing it. And thirdly, they won't have a living model to learn from. Okay, so Noah, that's my discussion on your question. Just let me know if you think that is that answer suffices to answer your question. Then I want to go into Sam's question, but let me know if that suffices and if there's any other questions on that point.
Thanks for the answer. It's almost acceptable, but it made me a bigger problem, which I won't get into right now. Go over to Sam and
no, I'll ask the question and I'll answer your question at the end if we have time. But what's the question? What's left to answer to ask them?
Well, I think that all the examples you pointed out is all man-written stuff. It's all man-made stuff. The Constitution, the recipes, whatever. Whereas I think that if Hashem wrote the Torah, He can write it clear enough into the future that knowing that people will have problem with language, and the same with the interpretation with the Oral Torah. So it kind of answered my question, but it gave me a bigger problem.
Okay, so now you're saying that, but hold on a second. So you were saying that God could have written a Torah that through writing it, you wouldn't have the issue of memorization because still people wouldn't rely on the text to memorize it.
No,
God
not
such a book.
memorization, understanding. He knew that in the future language is going to change, and he knew that people might not understand. So he could have written in a way that's not.
And my answer to you is no, excellent question. And my answer to you is he did. He did. How did he do that? Very good question. Excellent question. How did he do that? I think the answer to your question is he did by creating the Oral Torah. In other words, God, in all his wisdom, said, I see that the world is going to evolve when people's understanding is going to change. So therefore, the answer to the question is two things. I'll give you an Oral Torah. But that will force you to make sure that the understanding never changes. And this understanding will remain for all generations. And it will also be adapted to those times because you'll have the living role models. And you'll be able to see, because I could never give a living role model on a paper. And you'll also be able to take care of the problem of the memorization, that people will just rely on the books to memorize it. So God, in that genius, in his infinite genius, realized that, yes, we need to have an Oral Torah. Okay, if that doesn't suffice, we'll talk about it at the end. I see Naomi asked a question, why doesn't Hebrew have, I just want to quickly answer, why doesn't Hebrew have vowels? And did God use the language of Abraham spoke, which just didn't have vowels? Or was it always a proto-holy language, which Kabbalah would suggest multiple meanings? Okay, very good question. Okay, let me see if I could answer this question at the end. Oh, whoops, I forgot the end. I don't see the end of the poem, but so it's an excellent question. I'll see if I can get back to it. Sorry about that. Let me get to the, yes, Yochanan.
I was going to say with the Talmud and the interpretation of the Torah, I mean, that can still be interpreted in today differently, maybe, to how people might have thought 100 or 200, 300, whatever years ago. Is that continuous sometimes with the interpretations?
Well, this is the thing about the Torah. The Torah can never change.
No, but the interpretation.
Even the interpretation can't change. This part of the Torah, this part of the Oral Torah, this part of the Oral Torah is what we call, this part of the Oral Torah is considered biblical. Okay, so let me explain to you what I mean. In the Torah, we have two elements. There's something known as biblical and there's rabbinic. Okay? In rabbinic Torah, which is the other parts of the Oral Torah, there can be debate. There can be different opinions. This element of the Torah is undebatable, is non-debatable. You will see, if you look at the Mishnah, at the Talmud, you will see that it is replete, it's full of arguments. But they will never argue on something known in the Talmud's words or the Mishnah's word as halacha leMoshe miSinai. This was given over by Moses on Sinai. That will never happen. Why is that? Because these are the very definitions and explanations that God said, this is the meaning. So nobody could argue with that. And this was given over from teacher to student. So sometimes what you'd have in the Talmud, you would have somebody says something and he says, okay, what's the interpretation to this? So this one will say, well, we'll use something, we'll talk about this in future classes on this topic, on the other parts of the Torah. He'll use what we call derivation. He'll try to use drush to derive it. And they'll try different points. And then somebody will come along and say, hold on a second. My teacher taught me that Moses gave the explanation to this. And therefore it's halach l'Moshe Sinai. And then suddenly the argument is shut down because they say, oh, okay, who taught you that? And then you'll see something fascinating in the Talmud. They often will quote several names. They'll say Noach's learned quite a bit of Talmud, so you can understand when it says Amar Rabba B'Shem, Amar Rav Papa, Amar Rav Nachman, and it sometimes could give you like 3-4 names. Why does it do that? And it's quoting who said it because it wants to show you a tradition of where things coming from, to show you that nothing comes just by itself. These type of statements often have a tradition where they come from. If it is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, it has to trace all the way back to Moses. Okay, all right. So let's go back to the last point. Now, this is a very important point, and this was Sam's question, which is, how do we know at the end of the day that it wasn't distorted, it wasn't changed, and the oral tradition stayed the same? This is that very important question. So the question is that ultimately there's, everyone knows the name of the game Broken Telephone, right? The broken telephone. So what happens is, if you look in the picture, you see the one kid says peas, the next one says bees, the next one says knees, the next one says cheese, the next one says fleas. So how do we know that we haven't turned peas into fleas? How do we know that we're getting the same oral tradition that was given by Moses to Joshua and to Aaron and to the children of Israel in the desert? How do we know that? So that's a very good question. And the answer to this question is that the truth is that if you were to look at this is, could you remember what this if I were to tell you, okay, tell me, and I were to now take it away and say, okay, what was that thing? You probably wouldn't remember it, because it's just a code. But if I were to say this code actually stands for something. It stands for, sorry, on my screens. The shy green lion had too much to drink and fell out the window. The shy green lion had too much to drink and fell out the window. Right? Now, if I were to take away the line at the top and ask you to memorize the statement and ask you to play a broken telephone with it, the chance is that you would come up with something like my green elephant had, some had beer and etc. etc. It would be a totally different statement. So what do you have? If you were to do the following, if you were to say, okay, I'm playing, and there's actually done experiments, and when I've done this class in the past and I had time, I actually did this experiments with people. Okay, I would say, okay, I want you to tell the person that's the first person, you go, okay, Irene, you're number one. Listen to Irene. This is what it says. Look at the T. The T stands for the S says shy. The G stands for green, etc. etc. And I show you each letter one at a time, and I tell you what it stands for, tell you the statement. Then I say to you, okay, now Irene, tell it back to me. And then I say, okay, tell it back to me again and again and again. And I teach it, and you have the code. Then I take away the sentence. And I say, okay, now can you tell me? You'll say, yes, the shy green lion had too much to drink and fell out the window. But if I took away this one, you would be stuck.
Yes.
Right? But because you have, so the ultimately, if you remember going back to right at the beginning, Shammai said, you want to learn the written Torah. So he says to the convent, you want to learn the written Torah without the oral Torah? That's impossible. You cannot do that. Why? because the written Torah is just a code. It's just a bunch of letters. If you don't have A, which letter it is, a traditional what letters, B, the vowels, C, the punctuation, D, the basic interpretation, you can't even begin to learn the written Torah. The written Torah is simply a code. And if we wouldn't have had an oral tradition passed down from generation to generation to generation, telling us how it's spelled, how it's written, what the vowels are, how it's pronounced, etc., all those things, we would be totally and utterly stuck. But how did we make sure that we don't have broken telephone is this. Whoops. Okay, I don't have the video over there. So let me explain to you what actually happened. So in answer to Sam's question, which is a really important question, how did we make sure that we didn't have a broken telephone situation? The Torah tells us that the actual end of the Torah tells us that there was something called smicha. Smicha means rabbinate, that in order to become a rabbi, you have to get smicha. Now, the smicha that we have today there's value to it, but you can't compare it to the original smicha. The original smicha, we're told, happened by Moses. Moses, the Torah tells us that Moses was commanded by God to place your hand over Joshua. And you're going to test him on every single word of the Torah and every single interpretation that you've taught him. And only if he knows every single interpretation perfectly well, exactly the way I taught you, and he's able to take every single word in the Torah and explain it perfectly, then you can call him a Rav. Then you can give him smicha, and you place your hands upon him. And you could do that for several other people. And this concept must be given every single generation. You must have somebody from the previous generation that received smicha all the way back to Moses, from Joshua back to Moses, that could be tested, that they got it 100% the way they were taught by their teacher and the one that gave it back to them. And through this, you will be able to save the oral Torah tradition and make sure that we don't have a broken telephone. And not only that, you will make sure that the understanding never changes, the meaning never changes, and it stays there for all time. And that's why when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, he told the interpretation to Aaron and to Joshua, as I mentioned, and he listened to them as they explained it to the elders. And when he explained, then he let them listen back as they taught it to the elders, and he listened to how the elders explained it to the Jewish people, etc., etc. Each one making sure, not the way broken telephone is played. The way broken telephone is played is that you whisper something in the ear and you quickly go on and you have no idea what the person said, and they don't double check that they hear it correctly, etc. The Judaism was given in a totally different way. It was repeated and studied time and time again. The only question that we have really to discuss now is, so if that's the case, why was the Oral Torah ever written down? Right? So if the Oral Torah is so important, why did it have to be written down? I don't know if I have time to get into it. I'll just say that it's a separate question. I'm hoping that tonight you've learned what the first concept of the Oral Torah is, and in future weeks we'll discuss the other elements of the Oral Torah, how Judaism developed all the other concepts in Judaism, and the involvement, where there is place for change within Judaism and where there isn't. So in tonight's topic, there's little human involvement. The main human involvement is about memorization and double checking. Okay. Before I say, I'll just quickly answer my question, which is why the Oral Torah was written down. The short answer to this question is that the reason why it was written down is because after the destruction of the Second Temple, Judaism became dispersed into many different places. And not only that, the Romans had a great rebellion known as the Bar Kokhba revolt. And they saw that the ones behind the great, it was one of the worst rebellions and harshest that the Romans had ever had. Like they lost many, many soldiers, and they almost overturned the Roman Empire, their rule over Judea, over Israel. And they said, well, who's behind this? What's the strength of the Jewish people? What's making them do this? This was already over 100 years after the destruction, or 50 years, no, sorry, I think it was around 50 years after the destruction. They said, what's doing this? They said, well, it's the rabbis. It's the strength of their continued tradition. So what they did is they said, we're now no longer going to allow Jews to come to Jerusalem. We also won't allow Jews to practice smicha. And we know that, I forget the name of the last person, but some rabbis had self-sacrificed to give smicha to one or two other people, but we don't know of any tradition that was properly given over after that. So when Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who's the author of the Mishnah, saw this, he said, well, okay, the Torah says we're not allowed to write down the Mishnah because of all the issues that I mentioned and all the benefits of keeping it oral. But now that we're being dispersed, and now that we can't do smicha, if we don't write it down, the whole thing will be forgotten. But what we will do is we'll write it down, and we'll keep on updating the commentaries, and we'll keep on teaching the meaning, and it will still be written in that time that's relevant. So, you could read the Chumash and you could say, oh, this is easier to read than the Talmud. And it is. But the Talmud has much more details. But it was written for one particular time. And today, to understand the Talmud, you're going to need, the art scroll. And one day the art scroll probably won't suffice in order to understand the Talmud as well. Even reading the art scroll is getting a bit hard for most of us. So this is something that had to be done in order to simply preserve the Judaism the way it was, because that concept of teachers being able to teach one of the other directly was going to be an issue. And the term that he used was at a time that you had to do something for God, they had to, so to speak, give up the Torah. Okay, so that's the reason why it was written down. I'm just wondering if there was one more question. Does anybody have any other questions that they wanted to ask about the topic? Or arguments, something that wasn't clear, something we didn't answer? Okay, there was one other question. One second. If anybody wants to stay on for another question, you can. The question that was asked is, why doesn't Hebrew have vowels, and whether it was the same language that Abraham spoke. So I don't know the exact answer to the question about vowels and why that we didn't use it. But we do understand that the Jewish people were called the Ivrian in the Talmud times, in biblical times, in Abraham's times. And that's because they spoke the language of Ivrit. And what was that language? The language was the language that was given to Adam by the creation. When God created the world, he gave a holy language and said, this is the language that I consider holy, and this is the language which I used to create the world. And this is the language, the world, so we know that it says, Ba'asara Mamarot Nivra Olam, with 10 utterances the world was created. And he taught Adam that language. And then Adam taught it to his descendants. And we understand that for the first few generations, everyone was talking this language. And then it was called Ivrit or Lashon HaKodesh. And then it's the story of the Tower of Babel, of Tower of Babel. God made them each suddenly come up with new languages in order to make them disperse. And the only people that kept the languages was Shem, who was the son of Noah, and his descendants. And he taught it to some of his descendants. And that's how Abraham eventually got the language of Hebrew, as it was originally taught by God on Mount Sinai. So the modern Hebrew that we have today, it's taken from original biblical Hebrew, but it's been adapted and changed quite a bit. But we don't call that Lashon Kodesh. What the Torah is written, and the Mishnah in general is written in a language called Lashon Kodesh. The Talmud, by the way, the Gemara, is more or less written in Aramaic, which is what they spoke in Babylonia at the time, which is where most of the Jews lived. So the letters, each in Judaism, we didn't have vowels as part of the actual language. There was a certain holiness to the letters as they were. Okay. I'm just wondering if anybody has any other questions that they wanted to ask. Any other questions? Anything else? Okay. So if anybody has any questions that they want to ask about this, you're more than welcome. How do people feel about going on to part 2 of understanding the Oral Torah and how laws were derived? What we're going to come up with in future weeks is understanding. Hopefully next week we'll do part 2, and we'll understand how laws were derived further when they had modern questions, because the interpretation given by Moses was very basic, and then we had to get a way of understanding much more. And then we'll also understand how customs developed and things like that. So if you have any comments or any feedback about the particular style of this class, of this series, let me know. Okay, thank you everyone for joining. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you. It was a great show. Really enjoyed it. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good night, and shkoyach.
Good. Thank you, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ma'am.
Rabbi, when I first started learning the order of the planets from the sun, I learned it. My very earnest mother just showed us 9 planets. That
Nice.
made sense. And
Right. And if you have
every
those codes, that's what helps you learn
that's
it. Right?
it. That helped me to remember it off by heart, the order.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in first grade, my teacher taught me how to say the word because. And he says, Betty eats carrots and uses 6 eggs. And I wasn't sure, do you spell uses with a U or with a Y?
Okay. Wow.
It doesn't always help if you don't know how to read, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, have a good
Oh,
night.
interesting. Thank you very much. That was very, very enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Have a
very
good
much.
Good
God,
night.
thank you very
Bye.
much.
Thank you.
Laila tov.
night.
Thank you.